Alrighty. So I think we now have mostly people here. That's nice. Great. So I'm going to get this started. How's everybody's day been? Yeah? Good. I like to hear that. All right. Who came in today? Yeah? Okay. Who came in last night? Yeah. Who drove over 2 hours to be here? Okay. Who drove over 10 hours to be here? Wow. Yeah, I'm in that club too. It was, I don't even know. I stopped counting at 13, but it's fine. We took a lot of stops. But yeah, hi everybody. Welcome to MAGFest 2025. I like having the evening panel because everyone's awake and mostly alert. That's kind of nice. Who here has seen this panel before in any form? Okay. I see some liars in the audience. It's fine. They're my friends. All right, who has seen it here? Go ahead and raise your hand. All right, cool. Who has seen it at another convention? Could be Kineticon, could have been Anime St. Louis. Okay, cool. Awesome. So my jokes might hit. This is great. Good news. Typically, this panel does have a co-panelist. Her name is Natalia Maass. She could not be with us tonight. The state of Illinois needed her for bird reasons. She is my biologist and ecologist co-panelist. So if you were interested in hearing some of that perspective, I have her contact info, and I say that because we're going to talk about birds. Cool. All right. Just a little bit about me. I have my master's in biomedical engineering from St. Louis University, and a couple of degrees from the University of Scranton and the University of Hartford, Connecticut. I say that because sometimes my enunciation stinks and I sound cooler than I am. So that's kind of a little bit about my academic background. I worked as a marine biologist for a few years while I was working on my engineering degree at UHart. I've worked in orthopedic medicine, tissue engineering, and I am currently a quality validation engineer, which is a fancy way of saying that I make a lot of people in manufacturing sad. When it comes to the manufacture of IVD medical devices. If that sounds cool and you want to talk to me about that after, I put that out there just because last year I had a couple folks wonder what I did for a living, so that's what I do. But I'm also a Pokemon professor by accident. I'm a Pokemon trainer. I love Pokemon, and I love being able to teach biology and biological concepts using Pokemon. Just as a heads up how this is going to go, there's a lot of people in here. It is a later panel. I don't see a lot of young ones in here, so that's kind of exciting to me because I can ask you to hold some questions and comments to the end. So we can get through most of what I have on the slide deck. If you do have a young one and a very excited young one with you, I would love to chat with them after too if they have a lot of questions. But we're going to try our best to keep this going. I will do my best to check in because I'm going to throw a lot of information at you. Luckily, I'm hitting you on Thursday and not Sunday. So that being said, how is everybody in the back? Can you hear me? Good? Okay. If for some reason you lose audio or I get too excited, I want you to flag me down. Cool? Agreed? Awesome. All right. So here is rule number 1. And it is the rule that will follow this entire panel. Pokemon was not designed by biologists. We should take it at face value. There's a lot of what ifs. There's a lot of that breaks physics, and I agree, but I didn't design them. They're cool. At the end of the day, it is a work of fiction. Awesome? Good. Excellent. So it wasn't designed by biologists, but especially in later generations, we have been able to learn about some real-life concepts and some real-life biological allegories, let's say. So we can learn a lot about ecology, physiology, evolution, and genetics. And we're going to do our best to hit on all of these topics tonight in 1 hour. So hold on. Also, if you are in the back and you have free seats next to you, please feel free to raise your hand so our friends can take a seat. Awesome. Anywhere with a hand up is a free seat. Please feel free. Thank you. All right. So Starting out, biology introduced. So biology is the study of life. So those of you who are word nerds, you know this. It literally means, bio means life, ology or logy means study, right? To be alive, and some of you may notice that there's a whole nother panel on It's Alive. We're going to talk about that later. But as far as science is concerned, there are 7 qualifications that have to be in agreement for something to be defined as alive. People fight over this. There's a lot of different ways to define even scientific life, but here's what we're going to use for the sake of this panel. So first, every living thing has a basic unit of function. In biology, that is the cell. We're going to argue this. All Pokemon have some form of cell. It could be a cell like we know it. It could be a cell built in a different way. For things like ghost Pokemon or Pokemon made out of things that maybe are not carbon-based. That being said, a structure should relate to function. So for those of you who, like me, have read the Pokedex 7,000 times, or just in general are Caterpie fans, Caterpie has little ridges on its feet, and those ridges act like the feet on a gecko. How many people have geckos? Okay, I thought in this one we'd get more gecko people. That's interesting. I have only had like one other panel that's raised their hands, and like, I don't know, I think they're neat. Yeah, or if you've gone to the zoo and seen the geckos up plastered against the glass and you see those ridges on their feet, so those ridges increase their surface tension and allow them to stick to whatever surface they're on, and we see that in Caterpie. There's a continuity of life. We don't know how it happens, which is mildly concerning. Just mildly. Like, those daycare folks really just don't check on your Pokemon. You don't get cute little texts. You don't get cute little, like, this is what your Pokemon did. No. It was just, we found an egg. Like, okay, cool. Could you tell me if my Meowth ate plastic today? I don't know. But no, we just get eggs. But there's this concept that life finds a way. You have some sort of generational concept. We also have the use of energy. It doesn't matter if this energy is practical. It doesn't matter if something doesn't actually happen. This Magikarp's still moving, right? This Magikarp is still using energy in some way. We also have growth. So the games caught on to this early on, where there was that feature where you could take a Shroomish and kind of like see where it was in the sizing of Shroomish, and you had like a leaderboard that was in Ruby and Sapphire. So we saw that, and then it kind of evolved into things like Pokemon Go, right? Or even the more the Switch games where you can have like a small electrode versus a large electrode, right? So living things need to grow. We have response to environment. Once again, the more recent games are a great example of this because you actually have to run around. You have to interact with the Pokemon in their environment. And the results of all of these qualifications are adaptation and evolution. And we're going to talk a lot about this towards the end of the panel. But in the Pokemon world, there is definitely an emphasis on adaptation and evolution. So all of these 7 things means we have a definition for life. So what about these guys? I pick on these guys a lot. When Trubbish came out, they were like, wow, designers got lazy. And I'm kind of sad about that because he's kind of cute now that I've used him as I've thrown him under the bus too many times. But then we have things like Electrode and Voltorb, right? Like, that is a sphere. But that's a sphere. How is that alive? Let's take a look at it. So once again, for the sake of argument, all Pokemon have cells. All Pokemon have some basic unit of function that helps them build tissue, grow, and function. Their structure relates to their function. So Trubbish, for example, the handles on the bag are antennae. Those are sensory structures that it uses to interact with its environment. Also, I think it has poison on its teeth, which I guess makes perfect sense. I don't want to be bit by a trash bag either. Brand new sentence for me. As far as the Voltorb is concerned, how many electricians and or electric engineers, anyone who likes to play with electricity, how many people are that in the audience? Yeah, so red means positive, white means and or black Negative, right? So Voltorb is actually telling you it's an electric type without actually having to tell you it's an electric type. You have those separation of electric charges plausibly in the red versus the white. That structure relates to its function. Both of these Pokemon have egg groups. Once again, that's not well defined, even though I'm pretty sure Professor Elm, that's what he was studying, and it's still not well defined. They both have egg groups. They both use energy. So we see Trubbish eating in the anime. I don't like to use the anime a lot, but we do see Trubbish eating. We see Trubbish battling out in the field. It can interact with you. It's using energy. Voltorb and Electrode, that's pretty self-explanatory. They both grow. So once again, in the more modern games, you can actually see the exact size of the Pokemon that you catch. They both respond to their environment, and they both have evolutionary trees, and they have specific adaptations that help them in their own home environments. Alrighty. So what's the results of those? Well, we could talk about the basic unit of function in a few different dimensions. Basic unit of function can differ, right? We have cells, but then we have, tissues and organ systems, right? Like, what is the unit of function that we're talking about there? Are we talking about a single cardiac cell, or are we talking about the heart? Or are we talking about, energetic molecules? Are we talking about hormones? There's a lot to be said there, and there's a lot to define out. We also have structure relating to function, and I've kept this question in for almost a decade now, which is really wild to think about. But what is easier to hit someone with, a pool noodle or a printer? Pool noodles, raise your hands. Easier to hit someone with. Pool noodles, okay, all right. What would you like to hit someone with? You can say it out loud. A printer, yeah. So each of them has a different structure and an easier function, right? A pool noodle is meant for floating and smacking. The printer is made for printing things out and throwing down the stairs, right? Two highly different functions, but both effective at hitting people in their own ways. As far as continuity of life, yes, I keep saying that we don't know how eggs appear, but there is a heavy, concrete bed of evidence for the central dogma in the Pokemon world. And what I mean by that is that DNA is translated into RNA, which is transcribed into a protein. So you have this basic text for how Pokemon, how living things should continue down generation by generation. We have use of energy, so we have things like cellular respiration and photosynthesis. These are things that we see in our own world that kind of transcribe over to the Pokemon world as well. Growth, cell division and mitosis, that's the easiest way to think about growth. Our bodies go from babies to adults, right? Plants go from seeds to trees. We see this in Pokemon as well. Responding to the environment can happen in a bunch of different ways. So we have cell signaling pathways. So our cells talk to each other, right? Our nervous system controls our brain to our muscles. It controls how we sense things in our environment. And endocrine systems kind of tell things what to do on a slower basis. Adaptation and evolution is a result of all these activities too. So really that last qualification is kind of like the big deal. All right, so I just threw a lot at you. You probably feel like Pip-Plup right now. And biology, as you can gather, is pretty complex. There are subcategories and subcategories and subcategories. You can go from studying the environment to going down to the molecular level. I lost control of my clicks, actually. I think that's the last one. Nope, that is the last one. So as you can see, there's a lot going on there. So much so that my computer is not telling me how many clicks it takes to get to the end of that slide. But one thing to keep in mind is one person cannot know the sum of all human knowledge. And the same can be said for biology, right? So I am one person, I like mineralized tissue. That's what I got into, and then I got into quality. And there it goes, right? So that being said, if I misspeak and that's your specialty, come tell me. Because I can't possibly know everything. And that sentiment is in the Pokemon world. Not one person can possibly know everything. And the Pokemon games have done such a good job of having all of these professors with different interests, with different research projects, that go in and look at a different aspect of the Pokemon world. And of course, they have their projects and their assistants. So we see some professors that have more helpers than others, right? I mean, Professor Oak literally just went, hey, 10-year-old, you want to go on an adventure? And we said yes. So, you know, depending on what their specialty is, you kind of have this like grouping of the different professors. And I think it became more sophisticated as the Pokemon series went on and they realized, oh no, or like people are starting to make connections between real things and fake things. We better just like hop on that. So Oak, Birch, and Juniper were really, really good at focusing on ecology, relationships between Pokemons and humans, what habitats they're looking at, what fossils they're looking at, right? How did Pokemon come to be? You also have professors, such like I said, as Professor Elm. Help me out here. I drove really. Elm, Sycamore, and we have Kukui. No, Kukui. And Magnolia. Thank you. Did we mention we drove for over 13 hours yesterday? It's fine. But we look at things like from ecology and a community standpoint, we go down to the individual. How do Pokemon reproduce? How do they use what I'll call acute abilities? So the mega evolution, you're looking at things like terastallizing, right? And how do attacks work? So once again, you have a community of Pokemon professors tackling all these different questions so one person doesn't have to. And that being said, this is the original send-off, right? Pokemon originally started with Professor Oak asking you to go out and catalog every Pokemon there ever is. It seems a little unreasonable to me, but once again, Pokemon was not developed by biologists. It's a fun game. Cool. So off we go. And that's where we're going to start. We're going to start with ecology, because that's, once again, where the original games basically started. Ecology is defined as the study of interactions between organisms and the environment. So what lives where, and why do they live there? How many are there? And how do they live, right? So Lapras looks like a turtle, looks like a prehistoric dinosaur that lives in the ocean, lives in the sea. Makes sense. How many are there? We're told at the original games that there's not that very many. And then suddenly, you know, the thought is we all bred and released them and now they're okay. Yay, reintroduced a species, go us. Geodudes. I mean, anyone who has played the original games and gone through those darn caves with a Pokemon on 5 HP, you know it. How many Geodudes? Yeah, how many are there? Why are there so many Zubat in here? Where do they all come from? And how do they live, right? So Komala sleep for approximately 18 to 22 hours. They are very much analogous to koalas in our own world. So they sleep in trees so things don't eat them on the ground. Makes sense. So going into this a little bit further, the original games were very basic in the sense that you have different areas that you're finding these Pokemon in. And it was essentially one solid environment, give or take a couple of the ocean routes, right? And the mountain routes. That was about it. We got a little diverse when we got the ice path in Gold and Silver. But other than that, beautiful Route 4. Look at it, love it. So we could call this like a forest or a grass biome. So biomes are zones determined by the vegetation type or physical environment. And Pokemon got a lot better with this. I will admit I'm lazy. So the Scarlet and Violet screenshots are not in here. But I mean, Game Freak went wild, quite frankly, especially with Scarlet and Violet. But now we have deserts and forests, jungles, canyons, and the Pokemon that live there actually reflect the environment that it is, right? We have freshwater and saltwater in different zones, so when you dive, you're gonna find different things. We also have man-made environments. And man-made environments, as much as it sounds really weird, can be really beneficial to a lot of species. We're talking about things like sinking ships to create marine environments, placing rocks in the ocean to create marine environments, nature retaking a lot of things that may have been industrial, so think Chernobyl, for example. So what else lives there? We're talking about populations. So that's one single thing living in the same area, and a community being different populations of species in the same area. And they're going to interact, obviously, a little bit differently than if it was just one single thing, right? So next question, how many are there? Gotta catch them all kind of equals gotta record them all. So in real life, biologists use population studies and diversity studies to understand what could be in your environment. So back when I was working as a marine biologist, what we would do is we would put traps in off the dock. We wouldn't bait them. We'd literally pull them up twice a week to see what was in our harbor, because then we could understand what species, if they're protected, if we needed to make policies to protect them, if we needed to make suggestions to the marina about boat traffic or what kind of pollution was in the water. That was really important to know. So it was straightforward. Was it easy? No. I still have nightmares sitting at my desk job about hauling up a trap of eels in the middle of January. I had to measure those. So yeah, no, it was. So anyway, nothing at my job is that important, let me tell you. So it seems straightforward, but it's important, right? That way we can look at things like invasive species. I don't know what happened to the last photo on this slide. I don't remember what it was. This is my Midwestern setup. So the bird in the middle is something called a European starling. And when I lived in St. Louis in my little apartment by Slough, they would tap on my windows at 5:30 a.m. every morning. Didn't matter what state I was in. Didn't matter if I had just come back from home. Like, no, they were a menace. And they were brought over because the people who moved to St. Louis that built all those fancy houses wanted their birds from home. So they brought over these European starlings, and the starlings got out, and birds did what they did, and now they're everywhere, right? And they're pushing out other species. Right there is a Japanese honeysuckle, which can be found mid-Atlantic through the south, a little bit north. That takes over everything. I have torn out at least one bush from our yard, and those berries just drop, right? It's pushing out other plants. In some climates, it can push out plants that are more hardy, that are more suitable for the environment, that plants and animals know how to take over and animals know how to eat. So it's those things that, keeping track of what you have in your area is important to know what's moving in. This is not the one that I have the lanternfly in, but you guys know what that is. You're on the East Coast. You're probably really good at smashing those things. I don't gotta tell you. The Midwest, I have a whole slide, unfortunately, because they're just getting in there. But yeah, see, snap, smash. You guys are good at that. Cool. In Pokemon, we have this example. And so this is from Alola. So this is our Alolan Rattata and our Yungoos. And they are actually an allegory for a situation in Australia, New Zealand, called Macquarie Island. So similar to the Pokemon situation, where you had Rattata brought in to take care of a pest, and then what is previously a Kanto Rattata came in, got rid of the pest. It's a Rattata. It's kind of like a rabbit, multiplied. And they weren't able to get them off of the island, and maybe they became invasive. So what did they do? They introduced our friend Yungoos over there. So what happened on Macquarie Island, and actually a couple different islands, honestly, rabbits got out of hand. Macquarie Island was used to farm rabbits. What do rabbits do? Rabbits make more rabbits, right? So cats were introduced. What do cats do when they're feral? They eat everything. They go after birds, they go after rabbits, they go after mice, and that heavily disturbed the ecosystem on Macquarie Island. As of right now, they do have the cats in check, but guess what happened? The rabbits are overtaking again. So Pokemon, I think, was really great at bringing that to attention, that if you're introducing something, whether or not you mean to, so think about the snakes in the Everglades. If you're just dumping it, goldfish in lakes, you don't know what consequence it's going to have for native flora and fauna. So this is you could try this at home. Oh my God, those screenshots are from 2016. In 2017, thank you. Back when I still lived in Connecticut, oh my God. So Pokemon Go is fantastic, and it still works this way. If you have young ones in your life, or if you have a librarian that's looking for some educational program, use Pokemon Go to make a mock ecological study. Obviously, Niantic controls what spawns. You will be able to predict what spawns, but honestly, that kind of makes the educational design a little bit better. So feel free to use that. I think it's a really cool tool. All right, quick recap. We're halfway there. We still with us? Yeah, everyone's still here? Okay. Who's learned something so far? Who stopped listening 27 minutes ago? That's okay. Yeah, no, that's fine. Hey, just dissociate. Do what you got to do. And just in case you were dissociating through that, we talked about ecology. We talked about the way that biomes set the environment, so the natural world around the Pokemon. We talked about invasive species, communities and populations, and most species that are adapted to their specific environment. So next, finally, how do they live? So there's interaction here. So it is very difficult to live in an environment without having to interact with your environment or with another Pokemon or with another animal. And it could be positive or negative, right? I mean, I can roll over one morning and be super grumpy, and that's a negative interaction for my partner, right? But if he hands me a coffee, that's a positive interaction for me, right? Sorry, I love you. Invasive species are actually really interesting because that could either be a positive, negative, or neutral interaction. So the green crab is a species that came over to the US shores in the 1700s in the ballast water of ships. It was basically here before we were paying attention. So now, in the year 2025, green crabs are here whether we like it or not, but everything around us has adapted to them being here. So honestly, until I knew that fact, I just thought they were here, right? It is a neutral interaction, essentially, because things that are here know how to eat them, right? They know how to interact with this. In places such as the Pacific Northwest, in Alaska, and on the Asian shores, they're actually becoming a huge problem. So that's a negative interaction for invasive species. Adaptation, though, green crabs have adapted to their environment. They know how to hide. They know how to get eaten. It's fine. Everything adapted to them. So it's the development of unique characteristics or behaviors. And Pokemon are super fascinating. Especially if you read the manga, which I like referencing more than the anime, because it gives you more biologically accurate representation. So here's Farfetch'd actually building the nest, not just waving his leek around, right? So I think that's really cool. So let's revisit. So predation, do you think this is a positive or negative interaction? Raise your hand if you think it is a positive interaction. All right, why? Go for it. Just shout it out. Exactly. Yeah, not positive for the prey, but it's positive for the predator. So Caterpie is having a bad time. Caterpie is facing some existential questions. Meanwhile, that Pidgeot is like, yeah, dinner. Got some takeout. So positive for Pidgeot, negative for Caterpie. Competition. So once again, this could either be positive or negative. If you're sharing space, if you're sharing food, you have some tension there. That's interaction, and it could go either way, right? If you have cats, you've probably seen competition for food and competition for space, right? Yeah. And then we have something like symbiosis, which could potentially also be parasitic. Really unclear in the Pokedex, but symbiosis is when both parties benefit or seem to benefit. In the case of Slowbro. Parasitic, yeah, because he's feeding off of the tail, yeah. It's fine, yeah. See, hotly debated, could go either way. This is why we study it. Some more fun adaptations that I think Pokemon really took advantage of, Chinchou. They live in the deep. They can use this to communicate. They can use it to light up their environment. Macargo, which is hilarious when you read the Pokedex entry. Yeah, those who are laughing know. 2,500 degrees Celsius. No. However, it's still really hot, and it lives in a volcano. If it has its body temperature elevated, and it's meant to have its body temperature elevated, the less negative effects it has living next to literal lava. Caterpie we talked about. I just like showing off Caterpie's little ridged feet. I think it's really neat. I just think they're neat. And Kangaskhan. So Kangaskhan is a marsupial, and it has a little baby, and we don't wonder about that further. And returning to Rattata, once again, Pokemon kind of started getting adventurous with what they were doing in terms of showing off adaptations, showing off the ways that you can have a Pokemon live on 2 separate continents and still be the same Pokemon but have different ways of living, or even different colorations. So the Kanto Rattata is purple, right? And it kind of looks to me like an Ekans. And if I'm in Kanto and I'm a Rattata and I'm just living my life in the grass and a hungry bird comes by, could be a Pidgeot, could be a Pharaoh, if that bird looks down and just sees my purple tail, might be an Ekans, do I want to play that game? Or do I want to go after the Caterpie? Right? Whereas meanwhile, the Alolan Rattata legitimately had to change the way that it looked to survive from predators. It started to have different colorations to help it, hide in the dark, have some light, counter shading. Then these guys, I lost my mind when this guy was announced, because these are 2 different type of palms. It's a brush palm and a tropical palm. But if you think about the Kanto Exeggutor, it lives on a flat plane. It doesn't need to compete for space. It can just kind of like hang out and get enough sun, right? Whereas the tropical Alolan Exeggutor lives on a tiny little island, and it has to be the tallest Exeggutor to get the most sunlight. So that's why he's so incredibly amazing. We also saw Pokemon start to use just wacky little guys. So garden eels, they plant themselves on the bottom of the sand, they dig a little hole, and they just sit there and wait for the current to come and bring them food. I was a little disappointed to see that they lived on the beach. I'm not going to lie to you, but I still love them. And they're right, there is no relation to Diglett. This is a convergent type of evolution where they just kind of looked like moles. I don't know, but I love him too. Talking about more adaptations, we have the mushroom fam. So we have Fungus and Amoonguss that look like items. Oh, sorry, spoilers. So Fungus and Amoonguss look like items. This could be to spread their spores. You pick it up, oh no, it's a mushroom. Right? You're spreading its spores places, so it can therefore reproduce that way, right? You have things like the cordyceps fungi that takes over the bodies of wasps and is popularized in other media as zombies. I'm not here to talk about that. But we also have things like Parasect. So we see that fungus can spread itself, and we see those adaptations actually pretty faithfully in the Pokemon universe. And I just have Flamigo on here because there's no adaptation. He's just he's the Canada Goose of the Pokemon world. And yeah, that's his adaptation. He's just really angry. It's fine. All right. So with that, we've talked about adaptations, but how do these wonderful adaptations actually work? So I like to say that my master's work was done would have been done in Kukui's lab because I like to know how things actually work. And here's a reminder. Once again, please don't take this too seriously. I have had gray hairs come about because people take this a lot seriously, and it's just fun to think about. And it wasn't designed by biologists. That being said, we're going to talk about some real biology. So the cell, obviously, is its basic unit of function, and anything that functions has to use energy. That's one of the basic laws of our universe. In our cells, we use something called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. And it is produced through a mechanism known as cellular respiration. And where does that happen? Shout it out. Mitochondria. Mitochondria, good, which is the... This is the shining achievement of my career, and I'm not even kidding you. So, congratulations, you just used your middle school biology education. You thought you'd never use it, you just did. So, thinking of this, once again, we're going to kind of transpose this into the Pokemon universe. All Pokemon use energy. Some point, a molecule like this one is being used, and it is made in little subunits in the cell, right? So cellular respiration requires the breakdown of sugar. right? And breakdown of sugar, you eat. Most of us eat food. Some of us get our food from different sources, but most of us eat food. And here's the thing, plants. For those of us who are not green thumbs, we typically don't feed our plants. I'm sorry, hon. I make my partner do it for me, but we typically don't give them a hamburger, right? So here's the question. Do you need to feed your Bulbasaur? Depends. I like that. It depends. Yeah, and see a little like, oh, okay. So why not? Or any grass Pokemon. Doesn't have to be a Bulbasaur. It could be a Bellsprout. It could be a Weepinbell. I don't care. Is it symbiosis or physiology? So when you're looking at Bulbasaur, it's a grass-type Pokemon. It has a bulb on its back. How did that get there? They still don't know. More questions, right? But Bulbasaur has a seed on its back that performs a symbiotic relationship. So it has a plant. That plant gets sugar, and it soaks up the sun rays. It gets progressively larger, and the Bulbasaur gets stronger. And essentially, I have this whole lecture for like my hour-and-a-half panel. We don't have to go through it. But essentially, light makes electrons really happy, and those electrons build molecules that they then break down in cellular respiration. So when you do that enough, you get an Ivysaur. That's pretty rad. And Ivysaur has bigger leaves. And Ivysaur has a nice little flower on the back. And that means it can perform its photosynthesis a lot more effectively. Because depending on the colors on the leaves, it can absorb different wavelengths of light. So as it grows and matures, it gets a lot better at building those sugars. And finally, you get this big boy, right? And look at that. Big leaves, big flower, big, solar beam, whatever you're going to do, right? So here's the question. Do you still need to feed it? If it's growing bigger and it has more capacity for photosynthesis, and the answer is yes. You have things like carnivorous plants that eat different things, right? This guy's eating a mealworm, this Venus flytrap. You have pitcher plants that can trap like mammals. Like it's a little dark to think about. But what it does is it gives the plant different atoms, different elements to work with, different ways to build up its structure. So you probably should feed your grass-type Pokemon. I imagine like the more planty ones, you probably don't have to feed as much. But like Venusaur and Bulbasaur should probably be eating those meals. So what do you do with this energy once you have it? So your body is producing ATP, your cells are doing stuff, our Bulbasaurs are photosynthesizing. We could do it to build some proteins. So proteins are the building block for tissues. Building blocks for your bones, building blocks for your heart, everything. Your hair, your fingernails, protein is amazing. My favorite protein, by the way, mucus. Mucus is cool. Could talk about that later. But once again, these are more useful things like collagen, elastin, fibrin, and keratin. Spoink would not exist without proteins. Yeah, that's depressing. But it's very true. You also have things like calcified tissue. So once again, proteins, much like the rebar in concrete, allow actual like rocks and minerals and potentially steel to be encompassed into a tissue. You also have things like specialized structures. So once again, mucus is my favorite. What do you think that paint is that comes out of Smirkle's tail? Come on, guys. It's paint, but it's being built as a protein. Okay. I'm leaving you guys with some stuff to ponder on, and that's the favorite part of this. We also use energy for cell signaling. So our cells need to talk to each other, and they need to build up cell numbers. And that takes a lot of energy, much like me rolling out of bed on a Sunday morning to text my mom. So heat, using energy could also be heat. So heat cannot be taken back. It can only be put out. But cellular respiration is a combustion reaction. So we have things like that Macargo. We have our Charmanders. We have, Fuecoco, right? They're undergoing probably more cellular respiration. So that hungry little Fuecoco probably has justification for eating your entire pantry. Also, we all undergo cellular respiration, which means you're on fire. Okay. All right. So actually, this is just the Whalemore. This isn't even the Whale Lord. But we are going to start talking about the origins of Pokemon. And this can get a little interesting because we then start talking about the actual like lore behind the creation of Pokemon. And once again, this is a biology panel, not a theology panel. I'm not touching legendaries. I keep threatening to build a theology panel. I'm not doing that. It's too much brain power. So we're gonna stick with what we know of the games and essentially what the Pokemon professors have used to prove like the evolution of Pokemon. Cool? Alrighty. So we start with what we start with even here in our own world, the fossil record. So what's found in the ground? What came before us? Whether or not we should be using those fossils to actually bring those Pokemon to life is there's like been several novels written about why that's a bad idea and several movies. But they gave the 10-year-olds the power. So, they have an active fossil record in the Pokemon universe. They also have a written record, so things like the Ruins of Alph. I think in X and Y, there's also a lot of written record of what Pokemon existed before the wars and the calamities. Did I just drop out? Did you guys hear that? Okay, cool. So there's actually a lot of written record as well of what existed beforehand. And they also have unchanged surviving species. So we have Relicanth, which is a relationship to a coelacanth. And then they still have their mammoths. Please don't ask me how a swinub becomes an elephant. I guess it's kind of like a boar if I'm looking at it, but they technically still have their mammoths in the Pokemon world, and I think that's really cool. We also have Kabutops inspiration, a horseshoe crab. We have horseshoe crabs here. They are super important, and here's my soapbox. And since I brought the soapbox in far too long ago, I do believe that there are more regulations saving horseshoe crabs and limiting how much companies can catch for their enzyme. There is one specific test that we do to test for endotoxins or pyrogens, so bad things in injectables and medical devices, and it comes from horseshoe crabs. And my coworkers hear this all the time. We love our horseshoe crabs, and they agree with me. So if you are unfamiliar in your state or in your county, if there are limits on catching horseshoe crabs, or if there are ways to track horseshoe crabs and you're interested in that, I highly encourage you to do so. I cannot speak to anything anymore because I live in the center of the continent now. But, take a look. You might be surprised. Okay, here's the Willard. Anyway, I'm there. So now let's talk about the real controversies. So Bulbasaur is evolving. Congratulations, your Bulbasaur evolved into Ivysaur. No, it didn't. That old man's right. Oh, that silence was delicious. Okay, so let's get into that. That old man is correct. Bulbasaur didn't evolve into that Ivysaur. So let's talk about evolve. Let's talk about evolution. So evolution in our universe is defined as descent with modification, typically passed down through generations. And this was, of course, most notably studied by Charles Darwin, who published a bunch of books on the subject, including On the Origin of the Species, which is one heck of a read because there is like 2 paragraphs where an iguana stole his lunch in the Galapagos. But he did write down his theories about the Galapagos finches and the different shapes of their beaks and how that could occur on different islands, depending on what they ate. We also have metamorphosis, which is a developmental transformation that turns an animal larva or juvenile stage into an adult or adult-like stage. That's kind of rad. Hi, Maryland. That's your blue crab. Yeah, we're gonna get back to that. So let's go back here. So once again, our evolution happens through generations in our universe. So descent with modification essentially says if your parents have a trait that helps you survive, you are more likely to get that trait, and that will help you survive. So adaptations with a genetic factor. Once again, these are Charles Darwin and his finches, because if you have the right shape of beak to eat the food, you're more likely to find a mate and have kids. And if those kids have that beak, the cycle continues, right? Pokemon, once again, I was fed with Alola. We've had it pretty good since Alola because Oricorio are the allegory to Darwin's finches. I think it was a little bit of a an easy way out. Yeah, an easy way out because you could just feed them the nectar and then they turned into the magical feathery or a choreo. But, you know, it would have been more accurate if you had to go catch each one. One of the footnotes that my co-panelist usually brings up is it's actually even better because the feathers change and the dance styles change, and adaptations don't just have to be beaks for eating. It can also be things like feather for mate attraction and dancing for mate attraction. So that's another thing to think about that she thought they did really well. And then we have things like natural selection. So natural selection is the mechanism upon which all of this happens. So once again, if you have that beak to eat the food, you're more likely to find a mate and have little chicklets. So shinies. Shinies are not gonna do so hot. Let's think about that. So that purple whale lord in the open ocean is less likely to find a mate because he's not blue. That's sad. The red Gyarados has attitude problems. He is genetically modified, attitude problems, but once again, coloration is different. Does that affect the way it hunts and gets food? Gyarados have counter shading, dark on the top, light on the bottom to help with hunting. Something to think about. And that little pink Spiel, he's so cute. If he's on an iceberg and there's a hungry bear tick and all the other Spiel hide in the rocks, yeah. So love your shinies. They're very nice. Please love them. So tracking evolution can get kind of complicated, right? Because we're thinking about maybe one example of that Spiel, right? But there are multiple Spiels, and there are multiple seal-type Pokemon. So how did that all occur? And biologists will use things called phylogenies to understand and connect the evolutionary relationships between species. And they map these out through phylogenetic trees. And this was a paper that was actually published back in 2010. I have the citation on the end of the slide, I promise you. But they actually mapped out all the Pokemon that existed at that time, and they built a phylogeny based on Mew being the ancestor, and just everything past that. And it was really cool. I think they used it as their thesis, which, like, jelly. But making these is difficult. It actually takes computational power. So if you're not someone who's interested in going out into the field, or you're not interested in, you know, working in the lab, working on things like data in a biological sense and genetics, that's an option for you. So just, you know, keep that in mind. So with evolution, we then can talk about metamorphosis. So evolution's through parents, right? Think generationally. Metamorphosis is more immediate, and it's from individual to individual. So metamorphosis, once again, developmental transformation that turns a juvenile stage into an adult or adult-like stage. Sounds kind of familiar, right? That's wild. Yeah, I hear the sarcastic nose. That's my favorite. So let's take a look. Let's look at that. That looks like that diagram I showed you on the blue crab, right? There's an egg. There's a little larvae, also known as a Togepi. We have Togetic and Togekiss. That's awesome. So here's my thought here. Pokemon evolution is actually just metamorphosis. But here's the thing, marketing-wise, 6-year-olds. My Pikachu evolved into a Raichu is a lot less jarring to hear than my Pikachu metamorphosized into a Raichu or metamorphosed. Yeah, no, I can see why they made that decision. But if there's one thing that I want you to take away, if you want to be super pedantic in your Discords, it's metamorphosis. It's not Pokemon evolution. Get out of here with that. So that old man was right. It's metamorphosis. I know that wasn't the original joke, but it works. It works. All right. So that last 20 minutes is always kind of a doozy. So we talked about fossil record, evolution, metamorphosis. We talked a little bit about phylogenies and the phylogenetic tree. And that's a lot. If you need, like, to show someone that you learned something this weekend before you went on a 24-hour arcade bender, there it is. You can just take a picture of that. It's like, no, I learned all this stuff in under an hour. So with that, we are towards the, oh, wait, I have bonus slides. I don't know, do I go through the, okay, encore, I have 9 minutes. Do you want questions or do you want the bonus slides anyway? All right, cool. I've never, okay. So once again, I told you this slide is really popular. This one's bolded and in red now. So Pokemon was not designed by biologists. It should ultimately be taken by face value. And I don't remember what con it was, but someone went, what about ghost types? And I went, and I gave some kind of weak answer. And then I lost sleep over it for like 2 years. And I think there are people in the audience that had to help me walk through these following slides. Because, yeah, that's a good question. Because that kind of bridges the gap into I don't touch spiritual stuff. We're talking about science in this panel. I'm not doing it. But then I was like, you know what? And out of spite, we're going to talk about ghost types. So at the time, so this does not, I think, this is neglecting the last 2 games on the Switch, but these are all the pure ghost type Pokemon up to Alola. Pure ghost types. They may have changed since then, but I wanted to make my data set as targeted as possible. Because what could ghost types have in common that we could go off of? And Ghastly is 95% poisonous gas. That was the only useful piece of information in that entire Bulbapedia article. We had poisonous gas. We had a heat sink. So Gengar is a heat sink. You get cold when you're around Gengar. Misdrevious, I kid you not. Once again, the only useful thing. It shrieks. That was like, all right, cool. How are we gonna? Shuppet has little tolerance for light. I was like, okay. Duskull can pass through walls. Drifloon screams when popped. Which, if you didn't need another reason to be scared of Drifloon, wow. So Litwick is adorable. Its flame grows as it absorbs energy, and Mimikyu is weakened by sunlight. So I sat there and I was like, what the heck? And I came to the conclusion, along with some help of friends, that there was gas involved, thermodynamic component. So there was either the capture of energy or the release of energy, and it could either be fast or slow. So fast energy release is sound. So energy, for example, when you snap a rubber band, you can hear that snap, right? And it breaks. But if you're slowly like messing around with a hair tie or rubber band and you're just kind of doing this, it gets really warm because heat is released slowly. And light sensitivity, they're all sensitive to light. So, I forgot I had this fun little thing. Always do. But Mimikyu is weakened by sunlight. So essentially, ghost types, once again, potentially have some kind of base unit, but they all break the laws of thermodynamics. And that's all I got for you. But if we're talking about thermodynamics, once again, you thought this was a biology panel, surprise! I suffered through 2 versions of thermo just for this slide. So essentially, energy can neither be created nor destroyed. So when Gengar comes near you, he's stealing energy that you're probably never going to get back again. Sorry. When it comes into the idea of entropy, it always increases. So there's always a little bit that you're never going to get back that's released into the universe, unavailable for purpose. Very philosophical. But what's sticky about this is they don't follow the laws of thermodynamics because there is an exhibition of energy release. They're stealing all this energy, and then it's being immediately used. There's some entropy, but like they're breaking laws of physics that clearly do exist in the Pokemon universe if Ash can pick up half of the Pokemon he's able to pick up and hug. So, you know, give and take there. So with that, I think that was my bonus slide. Here are some citations in case you need it. I don't own Pokemon, don't sue me. My opinions are my own and do not reflect that of my employers. That's the comic from Super Effective and VG Cats. Campbell's Biology 9th edition is my best friend. And sorry, Mom. And if you want the phylogeny, those QR codes no longer work. I don't know why. But if you Google that, you will find that paper that mapped it all out. With that, we have 4 minutes. So important instruction here. They are going to kick me out, and that's okay because I need to let the next panelist come in. If you would like to talk excitedly at me, I encourage you to see me in that weird little foyer outside of the room. Cool. Did I do good, panel person in the back? Good. And have an amazing weekend.